Simon, welcome to the Talent Insight podcast.
Thank you,
How
my
are you doing,
friend.
mate?
Great to be here. I am
Nice.
very, very well. It's a Friday, so I cannot complain.
Yeah, and it's awesome to have you. Yeah, thank you for joining me. So, for the listeners, I'm personally interested to understand your journey because it looks like you've got an interesting background. So, how did you go from leaving school, being a soldier for a number of years to the present day, and that journey in between?
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK. Don't hold it against me. And I think as a kid, I just wanted to get out of home and go out and experience things and go and do something. My best mate's brother was in the army, and he'd come back every few months on leave and tell us about all the things he got up to and the countries he'd gone to. And I was like, 15, I'll have a bit of that. I'm into some of that. Yeah. So I did that for 16 years, mainly in the UK, and then a couple of years over here. Mum's Australian, dad's from the UK. Not that we held it against her. We just pointed enough at a city accent. And then I think I got to a point, sort of early 30s, where I'd seen a lot of friends who'd been in the army for a long time really struggle to do something outside of the army. Like, they're really unsure what they wanted to do. Like, their pathway seemed to be either police, prison service, or something of that ilk. And I wasn't 100% sure that's what I wanted to do. So I took the plunge, if you like, of trying to start a new career. Didn't realise that once you leave the army, no one really cares what you did. Like, you can have all these great stories about things you got up to, but no one really cares, or they don't care as much as you do.
Yeah, there's a lot of transferable though. Yeah, a lot of transferable from what you would have been doing even from a leadership perspective. I would
yeah. Think. Yeah, there is. I mean, look, I think back then I probably wasn't really that good at describing it. No commercial experience. So I'd never had to have those sorts of conversations. So it was all alien to me. I would say the difference that I noticed in between Australia at the time and the UK was that the military had always been in the public eye a lot more in the UK. So you'd have things like the Falklands War, you'd have the Gulf, you'd had the Iranian embassy siege that the SAS were on, and all that sort of stuff. So the army was very much more in the public eye. In Australia, it hadn't been. There hadn't been any active conflicts since Vietnam. Timor had just happened in, I think, 99. So that was the first time the military had really sort of had any sort of public view, if that's the right phrase. So I don't think those sorts of skills or those sort of transferable skills that you're talking about were as highly regarded or really recognised. I think it was just a different time. I mean, we're talking 25 years ago, so it was just a different time. So yes, is a short answer. There is a whole bunch of transferable skills, and I think now I'm a lot better at talking about those. And I actually do some voluntary work helping people leaving the military to better articulate those things. But at the time, it was challenging, and that was just because I didn't know how to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So what was the first sort of more sort of commercial opportunity that you went into? Who gave you that first opportunity?
My mum was in real estate at the time up in Brisbane, and she said, "There's a lot of stupid people making money. Simon, you should have a go at it." Yeah. Famous last words. Thanks for that, ringing endorsement. So look, I did sales for I think sort of 3 or 4 years. Eventually, I worked in car sales as well. I sold a car to someone who was a recruiter. They said, "You've got a bit of patter, you've got a bit of bants. Have you ever thought about being a recruiter?" I said, "I don't even know what that is." So no, and probably like a lot of people, and that's how I fell into it. It's sort of 2005, I think 2006, and that was that.
And it's interesting because I remember when I first got going to recruitment back in 2005, there was certain clients that would actually see someone being in the military as a positive because obviously the structure and that type of thing. And it's funny because I was hiring sales roles back then, and it was a big thing for sales. That's what they being motivated and driven, and that came with being in the military, and that was what people were looking for as a positive.
Yeah. So I think that whole thing of self-starting, being able to solve your own problems, being resourceful, finding, as long as you understand what the mission and what we're trying to achieve is, then you're co-contributing to the plan of how you're going to get there, and then you go and execute that plan. That's military 101.
Yeah, awesome. And how did you get to where you are today then, in terms of the being very kind of sort of the face of like the talent acquisition space? What was that journey like from your typical kind of recruitment into more of the sort of talent acquisition side?
Yeah. I did, I think I did about 12 years in recruitment agencies, some great, some not so great. I probably wasn't the best recruiter, the best commercial recruiter. In all honesty, when I first started, I think I still had, not chip on my shoulder, but I always have an opinion about things. I'd always question things like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Like, I don't understand why we do this
Yeah,
when that would seem like the right way to go. And I also think that in hindsight, I sort of confused wanting to talk to a whole bunch of people and have a whole bunch of conversations with people and build relationships with sales.
yeah,
When highly competitive recruitment agencies, it's back then again it was just get resumes out the door. This is when you used to fax resumes to, so you had these government clients where where
yeah,
where where submissions needed to be in by 4 p.m. on a Thursday or on
yeah,
a Friday, and you'd have 10 government jobs closing, and everyone would be huddled around the printer trying to fax off their resumes 5 minutes
wow,
before the submission, and then you're phoning your contact at the client saying, "We've got a paper jam in the fax machine. It's going to
yeah.
be late. I'm sorry. Can you still take these?" So yeah, so I probably wasn't the best.
Yeah. So what was it an easy transition then to go into the talent acquisition side for you?
I was. I don't know if it's easy. I mean, look, I don't know about you, but I think the first day in an internal role is when the rubber hits the road and a bit of imposter syndrome, and you're like, this is where I found out if I'm as good as I think I am.
Yeah,
So a good friend of mine, Matt Woodard, was working at Zendesk. You probably know Matt.
yeah,
I'd done a client visit with Matt and the Zendesk team, and they'd advertised a role, and a couple of weeks later, and I applied for it and had a chat with Matt, and we got chatting and I had a couple of interviews, and a couple of weeks later I got an offer for that role, and that was at Zendesk in Melbourne, and I loved it. It was on
yeah,
contract for 9-10 months. We had a great team. Like, I loved that time. There was a lot of learning. It was a real sense of teamwork and camaraderie. We were all trying to build this business, and
yeah,
talent was a big part of that. And I think probably for the first time in a long time, I felt like actually part of a team,
yeah.
rather than how I felt a lot of recruitment agencies were a group of individuals all chasing their own targets and almost kind of in competition with each other.
That's right.
Which,
Yeah,
now I say that out loud, that's probably why I didn't really fit that well in agency land.
yeah.
It felt counterintuitive to me. But you've got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, 100%. And you're right. I think from a talent perspective, being internal, if you get the right business and the right team, like it feels right. You kind of you're part of that mission. You buy into the
Yeah.
values, the journey that the business is on, and like you say, talent
Yeah.
acquisition is a major part of that. Like, without the
Yeah.
people, there's no business.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I get that. So that's awesome. And then your business at the moment. Do you want to sort of talk us through that? What that
Yeah.
involves?
Yep. So I've got a couple of things I'm doing at the moment. So I finished up with Zendesk, and I kicked off a consulting business, a talent consultancy called Crew. It's like a micro RPO. We had teams of recruiters on site at tech companies as we were going through that tech boom. It was just a different way of delivering recruiting services.
Yep.
There wasn't many other people doing it at the time. I think there was like one or two others. The guys at Lab 17, I think the guys at Preactor, who've got a lot of respect for both those businesses.
Yep.
I think we're all sort of doing a similar thing. I think we're all looking at how quickly tech businesses were growing, and they couldn't scale their talent teams. But hey, we can deploy a team into your business, help you get the headcount you need, roll out some better processes, all that sort of thing, and leave you in a better shape 6 months down the track. So, we had clients that I had teams on site for over a year. We had some that were doing sort of 3, 6, 9 months engagements, ripping through a whole bunch of hiring for them. And so that business is still running, sort of still do a bit of work in that space. And as a sort of side to that, I recently launched StartUp Hiring, which is, I guess, a learning platform or a content platform, if you like, a podcast and a Substack that's really about trying to give real world advice to founders or founding teams and the people that want to join them. That's things I've experienced, things I've seen that work, rather than what I see on a lot on, particularly on LinkedIn, is sort of fluffy advice that sounds very aspirational but doesn't really give you any. This is an idea that I've seen work. You should try it yourself. Which I think is some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. Things like for founders when you've got your early stage team and you're rolling around to someone's been in your business a year and they've got to have their first performance review, but you've never done one before and they don't know what to expect. You don't really know what to like. How do you do that? How do you? And that person's probably expecting a pay rise because they've been there a year and their mates are all getting pay rises elsewhere, but you might not have the burn rate to sustain that. So how do you have that conversation? So I think, over the last few years, the work that I've done sort of in that space, hands-on with early stage businesses, is trying to help founders and early stage teams, yes, get the hiring really, done really well, to a high standard, hiring and attracting the best people they can. But then also some of those early stage conversations and things that need to happen as you sort of grow up as a business. That's what we're trying to deliver. So.
Yeah, because it's a lot of the time with these founders as well. It's the first time for them, isn't it? So like all this is brand new. Even like going through the hiring process itself, as simple as it could be for me and you, like that's the first time they're going through it. It's like where do you start? Like there's just no advice out there,
Absolutely, and often founders potentially haven't been functional leaders either. They might have been part of a team and they've had this idea for a product and they've managed to go and get some funding and they're hypothesizing and they're trying to get some kind of product market fit, but they may not have been necessarily people leaders, and that's fine. There's this thing with entrepreneurs that they have this sort of wild optimism and this energy to be able to go and make stuff happen and do stuff. But the process kind of things slow them down and isn't their natural sweet spot. So they defer it to someone else or they just don't do it. I'm a process nerd. Like I love operations and I love process. So like, I sort of rub my hands together and go, oh my God, this is amazing. Another spreadsheet. Like I love all that sort of stuff. So being able to articulate and communicate that sort of stuff, as well as sit on a morning of calls to potential candidates, some who might be a really good fit, some who might not be. Like that's the stuff that I like doing. So being able to do that with startups, but then also being able to sort of relay those lessons to people who who are going through that journey is the stuff that I enjoy.
Yeah, awesome. And then that brings us on to obviously the topic for today. So we'll kick off with that. So the 3 cost-free things that can transform your hiring today, so from a business or from a talent perspective. So do you want to kick us off with that, Simon? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, perfect. So, look, I sort of caveat all of this with these are things that I've seen work really well, and I'll share with you afterwards some documentation. I love a document so that you can share with people who might want this. But despite all the tools and all that sort of thing, and the kitchen installation that I have going on, so if you can hear
that's all good.
If you can hear soaring, that's what that is. There are things that you can do at a sort of foundation level before you start spending money on tech and tools and all that sort of thing that can help sort of simplify some of your hiring and give you some really good results. And a lot of this comes down to clarity, and a lot of the discussions I have with founders and early stage teams are about clarity, getting clarity on what you're trying to hire from a skills and experience perspective, why you're hiring it, and how you're going to know it when you see it. So I guess the 3 things that people can do are, co-produce the position description with your team, rather than going off and finding a PD that another company has produced that you found online. You look at it and go, yeah, that seems right, and you put your name on it. Co-producing the position description with your team. We'll talk about what that means. Running a hiring kickoff with your team. So before you start interviewing, you all get together and you agree on how you're going to interview this role. So we'll talk about that. And then running a hiring retro. Looking back at what's working for you and what isn't, and all being really honest with yourselves, but also maybe the people that you've hired. So getting their perspective on what the hiring process was like, what they thought was really solid, what to them seemed like it didn't make sense. These are all things that you can do really, really quickly. They don't cost a penny in monetary value, but they need time and I guess the will to want to get better at those things. So we'll chat about those things.
And I'd imagine as well as the sooner they implement these things, like that, it becomes part of the actual overall process, the better. So before they go get to that 50 headcount stage, for instance, like when it's that first hire in the business and it's kind of like, right, this is the benchmark, this is how we do it. Then it kind of sets the precedence moving forward, you know?
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, I think these things should happen regardless of whether you're a startup or an established business. But I think when you're starting a business and there is so much to do, you sort of have this one-off opportunity to sort of set the groundwork of how we're going to behave as a business, what things are important to us that we're going to invest the time in. Like time's the sort of one non-renewable resource that we all have, right? And you've got to spend it in the right places. So to me, and again, this is talking from a TA world, someone who is coming from a sales world is probably going to think that focusing on sales is the most important thing. But I think if you can, in that early stage, you can spend time on doing the things that are really important that are going to impact the people that you're going to hire, that are then going to impact your ability to hit PMF, raise a Series A, whatever it's going to be. This way, it's worth spending a little bit of time. And these things probably need to be an hour meeting at most each, getting people together. So co-producing the position description with your team is can be as simple as you as a founder or the function lead if you're hiring into your team, brain dumping the things that this role needs to achieve. So not starting with what are the qualifications, what are the outcomes that you need from this role. So tying that then into what are the things that business is trying to achieve, say in the next 6 months. Most startups, you're having a short-term view of things. You're not looking at a 5-year plan. You're trying to either find PMF, get enough customers on to raise a Series A. So that might be about scaling the processes of acquiring customers and selling to customers, whatever it is that helps you get to there. So what things does this role need to achieve in order for you to hit your next target? So some dot pointing out of that is a really good place to start. Then taking that one step further, okay, what sort of background do we think this person needs to have in order to achieve these things that we need to have happen to be successful? Dot point that, share that with your team, get their input on it, because again, working with cross-functional teams, if you're building a SaaS product, everybody's got a slightly potentially different perspective. So the things that you'll do is you'll uncover some blind spots and maybe some unrealistic expectations that can happen when a job position description has been solo written. So the team input reveals what the role really requires, really what you think as the founder or the leader it needs. So you have your own opinion. But other people's perspectives that can shine a light on, well, actually, don't we need to do this? When customers come on board, who's going to manage that process? Who's going to manage the customer success side of things, for example? Different team members will prioritize different skills and responsibilities. So that's going to really force you to clarify what's really essential versus what are the nice to haves. And most job descriptions, I think, are kind of bloated wish lists. Hey, it'd be great if they could do that. Great if they could do this. Or if they had an MBA as well, that would be amazing. Like sure, they're nice to have, but they're not the things that are essential in moving the needle on the most important metrics of your business for the next 6 months. So then I think this exercise itself sort of becomes an alignment tool with your team, so you can better understand what you're looking for, how you can effectively refer candidates or spot good fits through the process. So starting off knowing exactly what you're hiring for is a really, really good place to start. So does that make sense?
No, 100%. And who kind of, because I'd imagine being in a kind of that startup environment, there'd be a real struggle because say you had a team that hadn't actually gone through that process before or know what to be looking for. Like who kind of sets that, like the boundaries? Because say, for instance, they could have a wish list of what they're looking for as in a person. And they could be saying, right, we need this, this, and this. But one of the criteria is like they think that because they've worked for a larger organisation and been successful in a larger organisation, they're just fitting naturally to that particular role. And I've found in the past that be a real sticky point for they think because they've been successful in, say, I don't know, AWS, Amazon, for instance, they're going to be you're going to blow them out of the water in this little startup. How do you kind of combat that in making sure that they're kind of fully aligned in kind of the expectations, and not kind of that wish list is not like pie in the sky, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So you mean the wish list of the position description, like
Of the
the
position,
responsibilities?
yeah. So
Yeah, I think it's got to be focused on. So this has to come from leadership, in my opinion, and it's got to be focused on if everybody in the business understands what the next milestone is.
yep,
So if you're pre-revenue, your only milestone now is to find PMF, right?
yep,
So if that's the single biggest metric, like what happens beyond that, to a degree, is kind of irrelevant. We need
yeah,
somebody to help us find PMF, otherwise we don't have a business. So focus your PD on, or your dot points of what this person needs to achieve in the role, on
yep,
achieving, like how they contribute to the bigger mission. This is the military thing again, right? So you've got a mission that you're trying to achieve. Everybody in the team contributes their skills to help us get there. So
yep,
anything beyond PMF, potentially irrelevant. Yes, there are some nice to haves,
yep,
but again, if you're focused on that as a starting point, I think that's the main thing.
yep,
If through your interview processes you're interviewing people who you're really confident can deliver that, and they've experienced life beyond that, and they've experienced life going from PMF maybe to raising a Series A. So now we've acquired customers. We know what their pain points are. We know which things we're solving for them. And now it's about cranking the engine of efficiency to ramp up revenue. So all these processes that need to happen, how do we acquire? How do we retain? How do we upsell customers? All these things that happen, how do we continue to deliver features that we know make our product really sticky? If you can hire people who've been through that journey post PMF to Series A as well, hey, great. But
yep.
your most important thing right now is finding product market fit, or else you don't have a business. So I think it's really easy to get distracted by all the
Yeah, I
other
think
stuff.
and I think
You've
I
got to
agree
focus on
with
what's
that.
essential.
Yeah, and I think that's the key part, is kind of like you find that at each part of the journey, you kind of need to find people that kind of have been to where you want to get to, and how we're going to get there. And then you kind of get to, and even then, when you kind of scale in the business, those people that have got you to there might not even be right for where you want to get to next. You know what I mean? But they've
Yeah,
got you to that certain point.
yeah,
So
yeah.
100%.
I mean, a really good example, and it went out on an episode of our podcast that went out this week, was at Cuttable hiring our first product manager to help us really nail what the customer problem was that we were solving. Up until then, it had been typical founder-led growth, on enthusiasm and sheer will. But if we wanting to scale, you've got to really understand what the customer problem is. So when we discussed this role, what was really important, we all realized, was that having somebody who'd been the first-time product manager before, because there is no one else to defer to. There is no one who's going to say, no, just go and do this. We needed someone who could own this and who'd done it before and had helped understand and really nail what the customer problem was, to help us then shape the way the product gets built to deliver to those immediate customer needs. So, look, I interviewed some incredible people for that role, and if I was hiring half a dozen roles at the time, I would have hired them all.
Yeah.
But we kept on coming back to this thing of, has this person been the first product manager before, and how has that experience shaped how they think about helping us find PMF? And we were, incredibly lucky to hire someone who'd done that previously with Mr. Yum, and they've been there 5 years. It was time for them to go and do something else. The interesting challenge is that being that first-time product manager is really, really draining. It's really hard work. Not many people want to do it again. Like, most people like doing it once. So that's the other hiring challenge, right? Is how are you now going to sell your role to somebody who's in a comfortable job, and you're asking them to almost rewind 5 years and do it all again? Like, not many people necessarily want to do that. So
no, that's right. Yeah. 100%.
But worrying about that challenge has got to come after you've defined what the need is. Because if you're always thinking about, but what's going to be difficult about this is, like, you're already putting problems in your way and you haven't defined the actual role itself. So you've got to stay true to what is the important thing about the role. So
awesome.
Makes sense.
And then obviously, it completely makes sense. I think it's an awesome idea. And then obviously running then a hiring kickoff session with your team. So does that? How long? So when does that? When would you envisage that to start?
Yeah, so I do these pretty much when I've when I think I've got a long list of candidates and we're going to get to the interview process. So I've done a first screen with a whole bunch of people, and I might have spoken to six, and we think out of these six, we're probably going to put three through to the next round. I'll sit get the team together, and I'll have already produced a brief of this is how I think the interviews are going to go. So how many rounds of interviews, depending on the role. Are we going to look for some kind of case study, like how we're going to get some proof around how this person thinks about this problem, this challenge that we've got? So I'll have built out some ideas around this, but we'll get to all of that in this hiring kickoff. So it's really important, I think, in that it can surface these sort of conflicting assumptions about the role before we waste time interviewing. So having everybody aligned on what are the signals we're looking for, what are we all going to agree is noise, and how do we all keep focused on that? And then how do we create an interview process that gives the candidate as much information that they need to understand the requirements of the role, but again, in cross-functional teams, gives everybody in the team, a head of engineering, maybe a head of design, head of product, if you have one. How do you give them all confidence that this person that you're hiring as, I don't know, head of customer success, whatever the role is, has the ability to complement all the work that you're doing to get where you need to be? So, understanding what signal. Sorry,
No, so I was just going to ask you, just the point there. How do you understand who to bring into that kickoff meeting in terms of like what is it based off seniority? Is it based off? So if it's another cross-functional team, would it be someone who's they're only working directly with? Like, how would you sort of understand who to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's peers to a degree, peers and probably managers. So if I was hiring a head of role, I'd get the other heads of. Because they're going to form the leadership group of the business. But you're probably going to have your CEO or COO or someone involved as well, as an input. But they're all going to have their own sort of specific evaluation criteria, because again, this is the thing with cross-functional teams, right? Everybody wants to ensure that the engineers want to ensure that the feedback they're getting on product allows them to build the next round of features properly, or ensure that stability happens. So they want to make sure that someone, for example, who is going to be in a head of sales role and is going to be bringing on, hopefully 1,000 customers over the next 6 months. The engineering team are going to be thinking about stability and security. So they have a vested interest in understanding that the person that is coming into that role, that they can have a good relationship with, that thinks the same way as they do. So everybody has their own evaluation criteria that's important to them and their functions, that hopefully rolls up into this is good for the business as well.
Yeah, perfect. So, and how do you come up with the assessment criteria for those different, and also on a side question to that, what does a good process look like in order that's mapped out in order to make sure that you're assessing all of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, the way I've done it is using previous experience. So the conversation might be if I was talking to you and you're the CTO, for example, we're around a table, I'd be saying, in previous roles I've hired, these things have always seemed to be important from a previous CTO. So here's some dot points. What do you think? You had some time to think about this. You helped us co-create the PD. How are you thinking you're going to evaluate? What's important to you? What are your thoughts? And again, this should be hiring should be collaborative decision making, and I think I've said it for 12 years or so now, but hiring is like people-based problem solving, right? So if you've got a team of people who are all invested in trying to help us hire the right person from a values alignment and from a skills capability, like do they have the experience to do the job, and are they aligned from a values perspective in how they treat people, how they think, how they approach problems, how they deal with stuff when everything gets really difficult? Because all relationships are great when everything's going swimmingly, right? But when you don't have any customers come on, or when sales aren't going where they need to go, that's when relationships get challenging, and that's generally when you see who people really are. So how do you pre-screen for all that? So everybody has their own opinion on that sort of stuff. So again, long answer to a short question, but I think coming in with some suggestions and yeah, hey, here's things that worked for me previously. What do you think? And getting everybody's perspective, because again, I don't think you can be, whether you're the recruiter or you're the CEO or whoever's running owning the role, it can't be your opinion. It's got to be this collective, collaborative input. It's the only way that you're going to succeed.
Yeah, 100%. And would you recommend them having those questions preset before they start interviewing people?
Yeah. So what I'd do is, I'd sort of be running these sessions, lots of typing and documentation. Once everybody seems to be agreed, I'll produce the interview plan. I'll send that out to everybody. These are the specific areas that you all had, you all have interest in. These are the questions that we came up with that we think uncover the skills, the experience, the values. Is everybody happy with this before we interview, before we kick off? Is everybody comfortable that this is the right way? You might get some, actually, I've been thinking about this. Can we edit that? Can we change this? But there's no point starting interviewing people until everybody's agreed that this is what we're going to do. So I kick that off, and then everybody goes, yep, we agree. And then I start booking in interviews. Pro tip for recruiters, when I book an interview with a hiring manager, so if the interview is at 3 p.m. tomorrow, at 9 a.m. on the day of the interview, or sometimes the day before, I will have scheduled an email to go to you as the hiring manager, reminding you that you have an interview at such and such a time tomorrow or this afternoon. Here's the resume. Here's your interview guide. Here's the link wherever you need to be or whatever it is. Here's the arrangement, the details. Make sure you're there. Make sure you turn up, because things happen, particularly when we work in remote life. And I've had instances where you travel 2 hours to go to an interview, and someone was working from home that day and didn't bother to come into the office, and the candidate goes, I just traveled 2 hours to be here, and now it's a video interview in half an hour because the hiring manager wasn't reminded that he's got an interview that day. Those little things that you can do to remind people that we've gone to all this effort to source candidates, to agree on the role, to agree on the hiring plan. Let's make sure we're there for interviews. Like things happen.
It helps.
So again, I think this hiring guide, this hiring plan, then sort of creates the accountability and then the timeline clarity that should reduce hiring drift. And I talk about hiring drift a lot. So, when people say to me, how long is it going to take to hire this role? I usually say something like, it's probably going to be outside 3 months from us saying, this is the role, we've all agreed on the role, to someone being in the seat, because most people have a 1 month notice period if they're working. We might get lucky and find someone who's available immediately. Brilliant. But then you rewind that and it's couple of weeks for interviews, sometimes more, because someone's on leave or someone's away or someone's had something come up, someone's sick. So you get hiring drift, which then impacts on the candidates you're interviewing, because they're probably in other processes as well. And if their process is moving quickly, then you've got another challenge to try and get through. So I think just having this hiring plan creates, again, this co-accountability of a team, and try and reduce this drift.
Yeah, and those sort of discussions you'd have in this kick-off session. So, say for instance, there was a hiring manager that was on holiday 2 weeks into the session, 2 weeks into the hiring process. You'd kind of highlight that and go, right, who else could we have step in here?
Yeah. Or I might say, is it not worth us kicking this off right now? Should we wait? Dave, if you're saying you have to be in these interviews and you're not comfortable deferring this to someone, there's no point in us starting right now. So having those, you've got to have those sorts of conversations. If it means you're waiting 2 weeks before you kick off, then so be it. But But if Dave's comfortable having somebody else, so again, this thing of teamwork. If he's saying yes, I'm comfortable for somebody else to step in for me, he can't then bleat and whinge about not liking the person that was hired, because you've handed off responsibility. So it's like, what are you comfortable with, right? Well, you can bleat and whinge, but no one's probably going to listen.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so from your perspective, like, if you take engineering to the side, because I think engineering can vary company to company, depending on obviously each process. But what would a good hiring process look like in your mind, in terms of like if you talk about the stages, how many stages, what would be involved in those stages?
Yeah. Look, I think it's always the balance. I think there's a saying that fast game's good game, but you come back to what is an interview process. It's a data collection exercise, isn't it? Yeah, you're trying to collect as much data in the form of signal and noise as possible. You have hiring managers who have different levels of competency around interviews, different levels of experience. So again, I think as a TA or recruiter, your job is to guide that whole process. I've lost count of the amount of interviews I've sat in on with hiring managers who are not as comfortable as others. But how do we learn how to interview? We do it mainly through osmosis by sitting and listening to other people do it. So I actually love interviewing. I like people. And I like the discovery of interviews. So I'll sit on interviews all day with people. So I think from a process perspective, I think it's an initial phone screen. This is validating what I call the big ticket items. Budget. So does this person fit our budget? Do they have work rights here? When are they available? If someone's got a 3-month notice period, but we want someone to start in a month's time, then that might rule them out. And at a high level, is there some kind of alignment? So I think and I think the other thing that we're in now is reconfirming, do they want hybrid or in office work? Like, some people that never want to go to the office again. Some people want to be 100% remote. So again, you should be clear on that in any job ads, but something else you need to reconfirm. You shouldn't be getting to the end of an interview process and suddenly salary is an issue. You shouldn't be getting to the end of an interview process and suddenly work location or days in the office or work rights is suddenly an issue. Like these sorts of things are clarified up front. So that, I think, first round interview, potentially some task of some kind to validate some kind of competency. A second round interview. I like offering a third, and I like suggesting a third if for some reason we haven't been able to fully answer all the questions that we thought we should have done. Then I like having the option for a third. So I always talk about the opportunity for a third. Excuse me. And I think also important to recognise that for the candidates as well, sometimes they might want another discussion or two with people just to get a bit more of a feel. And again, I think this comes down to the competency of your hiring team in interviews. Like interviews can feel like this really unnatural conversation and very performative. We've all interviewed people who, they're great in an interview. God, they're amazing. They blew us away. They just spoke really well, and they turn up and they're just bloody hopeless. These are performers. They're really good at performing. And the challenge there is that interviewers haven't been able to dig beyond that. So again, this learning how to interview. So not just asking the what questions, but the how and why questions takes you a level down. So instead of, what were your sales targets? Oh, there are 1 million. Did you achieve them? Yes, I did. How did you do that? Why did that happen? If they didn't achieve targets, if they didn't achieve sales targets, why not? If they can't articulate clearly that their metrics are off, we thought we were going to close from every 10 demos we did. We thought we were going to close 3, but it turned out to be 1.5. So it took a 3-month batch to a 3-month period to improve the standard of our demos so that we could convert more customers post demo to a paying customer. And that impacted our 12-month runway or sales forecast because we had this 3-month window. If they can articulate that, that is gold. The next question is, 100%. So if you're going to come on board here, how does that learning impact here? What would you do differently? And this is a great line of conversation, but performers will potentially blame other people or the market or this or the product wasn't that good. But if they don't know the metrics and the numbers, there's no conversation. So again, I think this recognizing there's the what and then the how and the why and then the follow on. So sometimes you don't get enough of that through interviews, and you might need a third, but sometimes a candidate might want a third interview as well.
Yeah, no, exactly right. It's a two-way process, isn't it? And I think a lot of companies forget that. And I do think there was a time through, I think it was through COVID, where there was certain companies, especially on the engineering front, it was one interview and offer. And you imagine the backlash of that. Well, I still think that's a little bit too short. But I think even from a candidate perspective, you do want to, for me personally, I'd want to have at least 2-3 meetings to get a real understanding. I still don't think even then you get a real true understanding of the actual business itself until you sat in there and in there. But I do think there's a fine line between trying to work it at speed, and there's kind of a side of it cutting corners as well from both sides.
Agreed. And I think also the other thing that a lot of, well, maybe they don't, I don't know. I think something that it's really easy to forget is that startups aren't for everybody. Like, I think a lot of people like the idea of startups, but all startups are a risk, right? And we're talking like businesses that are, maybe pre-revenue, Series A. There's a risk there. The path ahead isn't always clear. You need people who can spot a problem, fix it, and move on. Sometimes not knowing what the best option is, but being able to make some rational decisions really quickly, get a sense check from someone else. Hey, can you sniff test this idea for me? Let me know what you think, and then crack on. Like, that's not for everybody. Some people love having clearly defined process, clearly defined next steps. This is what I do when this happens. These are our SOPs. And in startups, you often don't get that, because even if you're pre-revenue, like, your world tomorrow can change like that, and you need to be comfortable with that. So again, that's not for everyone. It sounds exciting, but for some people, that's terrifying. So your talent pool, your candidate pool is so small comparatively that you have to maximize every interview that you have. So.
I 100% agree with that. It's it can change. One moment you'd be on one route, and next minute we go right, change of strategy, we're going in another route, and you've got to be comfortable to be able to accept that. And it's just part of the journey, especially from a talent perspective as well. Is that you could be going through this fast growth 1 minute, and then the next minute is right, we need to catch up budget wise. We need to. We're not quite doing the figures, and the first team that's looked at is the talent team. So, but you've got to appreciate that when it's going well. It's got to go well. It's good, but then there's times where there is a little bit of risk involved there as well.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think going back to the initial sort of topic, I think co-creating this hiring plan, everybody knowing what the hiring process is going to be, how we're going to validate, how we're going to know what good looks like when we see it. Is important, and so a couple of interviews, and then I think this really important part is getting the hiring team, the interviewing team together, pre-offer, reconfirming. So running a review of, these are the two candidates that went to final round interview. If you're a recruiter and you've got some kind of ATS set up, you might have a feedback module or something in your ATS where hiring managers can leave their reviews, they can score candidates, that sort of thing. If you don't have one of those, you can just get together in a room and just talk through pros and cons. I always like to start with pros. So you go around everybody in the room. Adam, give me 3 pros for Mary, the candidate we interviewed yesterday. What things did you really like? You talk about those. What are the challenges? What are the cons? You go through those. And what happens when you start having this conversation is you might say, I really didn't like the way that Mary talked about X, Y, Z. And Helen in engineering says, well, actually, she made a really good point, because that is really important, because where we're going next is da-da-da. So what she was saying was absolutely relevant. So sometimes our own perceptions of what was good or not so good can be challenged, which is absolutely a good thing. But what you're trying to do is get to a point where everybody's got consensus on, yes, let's offer Mary, because all of her goods massively outweigh the cons. She's great. We liked her. There's some values alignment. We really like her. Let's go and make an offer. So you've got to have those discussions. Okay.
I was going to say, I always find that it's always helpful if they submit, those that are involved in the hiring process, submitting their feedback first before they having that kind of get together, because you can sometimes be influenced in terms of
Yeah.
I've seen it firsthand where someone probably a little bit quieter has been sort of outspoken by someone else that's got a bit more of a voice in
Yeah.
the team, and they've like,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that, and it's kind of not really their real viewpoint. So I always recommend, especially if you've got an ATS, submit the feedback first, then let's
Yeah.
get together and have a discussion and talk through those points.
Yeah. We call this the hippo effect, the highest paid person's
Yeah.
opinion. So
Yeah,
quite often
that's right.
people will defer to the most senior person in the room. So you're absolutely right. If you can get that feedback prior,
Yeah.
way I've done that is I say to the team, we'll all be sat in a room or sometimes in the office kitchen. All right, I'm going to read out everyone's feedback. You don't need to say anything right now, but I want you to just have a think about how we've all talked about Mary, and I'll go through all the feedback. People will be making notes. All right, how do we feel about that? Now, Adam, talk to me more. You said X, Y, Z. Talk to me more. Give me some context. And you might have changed your mind since then. You might go, you know what? I've thought about that part of the conversation. I actually think they're a lot stronger than I originally thought. So, there's a thing for trusting your gut and making decisions quickly, but there's also something to be said for thinking deeply about the conversation and about the interactions and what they mean. So, there's value. You've got to have that discussion, I think.
Yeah, and I find it also making sure there's no assumptions being made as well, because I think there's hiring managers have been guilty of coming away from a meeting and said, actually, they didn't have this, and well, what question did you ask that was going to uncover that?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I didn't.
Yeah.
So, and there's people being declined based off the actual interview and not asking the right questions rather than them not being the right answers.
Yeah, mate, I've had engineers come in, senior engineers come in from an interview, and they'll walk through the pod and going, oh, we're not hiring that guy. They had a Microsoft Surface. Like, which developer, of any note has a Microsoft, saying it in front of the whole team. Like, what are you talking about? These are not criteria that we're making decisions on. You absolute numpty. So you're right.
So that get together after the hire, that the retro that you're talking about, where you get the new hire together within this is a completely separate meeting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've done these for years, and they're really helpful. In an ideal world, I'd probably do them once a quarter, because it just allows you to keep a pulse on things. So anyone that you hired in the last quarter, get them in. People that were in your hiring teams, get them in. I'll have sent out sort of some kind of questionnaire beforehand, that's just asking them how are they feeling about hiring. Is this process working for them? Is having all these meetings, so like the amount of people said, we've got to have all these meetings about hiring. So, well, it's better than having all the meetings after someone's resigned because we made the wrong decision. So let's have them now. Is this hiring process working for you? What are you liking? What are you getting the most value from? Which bits are you struggling with? Which bits what are we doing that you think, actually, do we really need to do that? Have we got too much bloat in the process? I've got opinions about things, but none of my opinions are that firmly held that I'm not prepared to change them. So, again, startup world, you've got to make the most of the time you've got and be as rigorous as you can. And sometimes that means being flexible and being adaptable and all the alls, but getting other people's opinions as well. For your people that you hired, what was it like for them? What can we learn? When they think back about the interviews that they had or their onboarding. Cuttable, I was responsible for doing all our onboarding as well. When you're getting really good feedback about that, it just allows you to tweak things as you go, because just because it's today's process doesn't mean it needs to be tomorrow's.
No, that's so true. Yeah, and it's interesting to things that you probably wouldn't even think about. It could be as simple as like it's a female product manager, and they've been interviewed all the way through the process by a male-dominated panel or a hiring manager. And it's things like that you kind of sit back and go, actually, we didn't really think about that, and that's something we probably should change moving forward. How in terms of like the retro, what's kind of been in your experience with those that you've run, what's been the biggest kind of highlight that you've kind of found through doing one of those retros that you've kind of said, well, actually, that's a really good point. We'll change that moving forward.
Yeah. So again, for me, the biggest thing that we're trying to get out of that is, apart from the experience and that sort of thing, is the interview processing predicting actual job performance? So in other words, are the things that we're looking for in the way we're evaluating actually giving us a realistic through line to this is how the person's going to perform in the role?
Yeah.
So yeah, most companies never connect these dots. Like, is what we're doing giving us the best possible chance of getting success in that role? And if you're not doing that, then you're just making the same mistakes. So that could be, if we're asking a product manager, for example, to do some kind of assessment exercise, is that relevant? Are the things we're asking in that exercise relevant? If we're asking them to make assumptions about CAC and LTV and churn, but then they're not actually doing that in the role, they're more working in a feature factory where they're just pumping out features, then the task we've asked them to do is totally irrelevant to the job. And by asking them to do that task, we've let them think that they're going to be involved in all the commercials when really they're just pumping out features. So the process wasn't fit for purpose. It's not predicting job performance. So I think that's the biggest takeaway is constantly being able to review, is what you're doing hiring you the best people possible and giving you the best chance of success in the role. And if you can't connect those dots, then I suggest it's probably just some cognitive thinking that needs to go into that. So I think that's important. I think what other things? I think through the process, asking people that you hired how close were they to accepting another competing offer. What made them choose you? What, did they have any red flags through it? When you're reviewing some of the interview questions, did all the interview questions and all the things that we looked for actually help predict success, or was some of them a bit sort of theatrical? Was there a bit of performance on our part in there? So again, it's in the same way that you have a retro over how a feature went out the door. I think having a retro around how you bring in the people that are going to shape the rest of your business is important.
Yep. And how do you ensure it's a safe place for especially for that new hire to come into a business and kind of being able to be truthful about the hiring process with the hiring manager that's just hired them sat in there? Like, how would you ensure that that's kind of like a comfortable place for them to be able to share honest feedback?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it comes back. This comes back down to do you have any values yet as a business? How do you treat each other? Are we more interested in being right, or do we want the right outcome? So again, when I said earlier that I have a lot of opinions, but they're not that firmly held that I'm not prepared to adjust them and change them. I don't need to be right about any of this stuff. I just want us to have the right outcome and get to the right result. So I think if we're hiring people like that, and again, this comes down to getting to know people and getting to understand people. If I'm running that meeting, I'd be kicking off that meeting by saying there are no bad opinions in there. You might hear some stuff that you don't necessarily agree with, but we're going to handle it respectfully. There might be some stuff that to you is confronting. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If we're all treating each other with kindness and we're having conversations in the right way, this is all just learning for us. None of us need to come out of this feeling offended if everyone's communicating the right way. This is about us learning and growing as we go. So again, I think every conversation, how you set up the conversation is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think so. And also, if you were kind of in that kind of before you get the description and you roll out, right, this is what's going to happen moving forward. When we get to the higher stage, right, we're going to have a meeting, and so everyone's in the process is aware of what the outcome's going to be at the end, like we're going to run that retro. The hiring person, whoever we hire, is going to be sitting in it, and we're going to have honest feedback. As long as it's set out in advance and people are aware of it, and then you kind of align that with the values of the business as well.
Yeah, and I think also this thing of there's no such thing as perfect. We can spend all this time on kickoff meetings and co-creating the PD, but nothing's perfect. Nothing ever is. We're doing the best we can with the info that we've got and the time we've got. And if we need to adjust things as we go, hey, look, that's cool for all of us. We learned something. We get feedback that our process wasn't brilliant. Great, we learned something. It's not an insult. So again, you're right. It's the way we set these up, and then the way that we internalize things as well.
Yeah, No, that's awesome. Well, Simon, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend on obviously Talent Insight podcast. But just for the listeners, mate, how can anyone reach out to you? What's the best sort of network, and how can they sort of get in touch if they've got any further questions on what you've discussed?
I'm literally the easiest person on the internet to find. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can go to startuphiring.com.au, find us there.
Yep.
You can go to my consulting part of the business, Crew Talent Advisory, wearecrew.io. But I'm literally the easiest person in the world to find.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate your time today, mate, and it was awesome to speak.